my to add a little bit, my looking again at the, I don't want to call it financial innovation because it has a bad reputation, but as innovation, attaching it to attaching sustainability to materiality, it's first thing, it attaches to a framework that's already existing. And you mentioned CSRD, but Europe decided to postpone a number of reporting and lower the bringing up the
Lower
threshold
the
of
stringency, yeah.
reporting. Yeah. Uh, but they kept double materiality, and the same it's in the California laws. And I think when we talk about that, we probably want to look at the supply chains, which we know there are worldwide.
Right.
And most of the reports I've seen show carbon footprint, greenhouse gases, social reporting. You know, the social part of the reporting
Sure.
being transferred from companies operating globally to supply chains, which are globally, and some of them are actually national, local. There are a lot of discussions about how these companies operate. Again, two questions for you, but one
Sure.
question is more, a little bit more elaboration. Elaborate, please, for the people that want to know about the supply chain and double materiality. And
Yep.
the second thing, how do you see these supply chains being actually changing with your experiences talking to so many
Yeah.
executives? Because there are main participant in the
Very, very, I mean, this is another sort of critical element. I mean, where that is a huge area of contention in the United States around scope three, accountability. So this is accountability sort of beyond the corporate walls, and it encompasses supply chains, but also, the forward-looking value, the sort of downstream value chain like consumer impact. So really, it's about taking into account the entire, impact of the product. So if you're like a company that is really rigorous on this, that I've studied, is Allbirds, which is an apparel and footwear company. This is about them reporting on the sort of sources of wool for the sneakers all the way through to the end
Mhm.
of life of the actual product. And so companies are very creative in their how they sort of slice up their corporate footprint in order to avoid responsibility. This is something actually similar that I discussed a bit in the Profiteers as well. And so by stipulating sort of this, supply chain scope three impact in the CSRD, I think that this is something that is going to be make a much more rigorous set of accountability, and companies won't be able to just offshore or sort of push things out of push things off their sort of carbon balance sheet or
Down,
social responsibility balance sheets, so
downstream.
to speak. Yeah. And this is having huge impacts through the world. I mean, for instance, about a year ago, I was in Malaysia. I was there to do a couple speeches and actually presented a conference at one of the universities in Kuala Lumpur. And one of the senior people in the trade ministry had heard that I was in town. I'm not sure how they knew anything about me, but I got a message that he wanted to meet with me, and particularly talk about my book on B Corps, which is actually very much about accountability. And what he was thinking was that because he saw things like the CSRD coming down the pike, and Malaysia is a country where a lot of the businesses are small, medium-sized entities that are actually in the supply chain of a lot of European and American companies. In the past, they didn't have to worry about this, but actually they were going to be in the future having to be much more rigorous in how they measured and how they reported up to their customers for their customers to aggregate for their reports. And what he saw is that if they could really understand how to get ahead of this, this would actually could become a competitive advantage to Malaysian small, medium-sized enterprises as opposed to, Vietnam or Indonesia or whoever they're competing with. And so he was very active in trying to create an upskilling program for Malaysian companies to be able to be more accountable on ESG factors so that when their customers start asking for that, they would be ready and that would be something that they could then pass on. So I think, these are the kind of impacts that, uh, because I think that, making sure the companies are accountable for their full value chain, we are able to, people can't just offshore or creatively, create boundaries to get around it, but actually they need
Move
to,
it downstream,
yeah,
right?
move
From
it downstream. Exactly. Yeah.
actually at AKFI we did a couple of white papers on the
Oh,
gap between the suppliers and their customers, right? And eventually the supply chain. And we found out that each large company has its own sustainability goals, its own sustainability objectives, while it needs reporting. So if you think of large companies, we use tires and car companies as an example because most people understand it quickly.
sure.
And in this model, the tire companies may need to report to 10, 20 different car companies about sustainability goals, sustainability objectives,
Mhm.
which are all over the map. When you analyze a vertical industry, you find net zero objectives between, let's say, 2030, 2050. Some by carbon footprints, some take measures to reduce carbon footprint. They all need the same supplier to help them, and the supplier now it's in a position that before the supplier was not in reporting the data, deep reporting about what they produce, how they produce were pretty much a commercial agreement, and now they are requested to produce this data. So especially in the European model in California, they have to report it upstream, and the customer, the large company, the car industry, it's actually the one which will be penalized for
Mm.
misinformation in reporting. So to me, it also changed this flow of data. AI came on the right moment, but it's not enough to look at these dynamics of the information moving between the supplier and the
Sure.
supplied the customer. So it changes quite a lot the dynamics of how reporting is done, not only in terms of double materiality, which you cover so well, but also in terms of how you make this, how you simplify that. So AKFI is actually looking
Right.
now to create a standard of the transfer of this
Mm.
uh, information and objectives, not so much of the data, because this is another level of complexity, but the change of how you set a common set of goals. So you align the sustainability requirements of different car manufacturers, for instance.
Mm. Good.
So there is a lot of work, I'm sure, to be done still in the area, and
Yes.
especially with the supply chains. And the supply chains are also changing rapidly
Yes.
now with the politics and the economics. So I think the suppliers in 4 or 5 years will look very differently, both in terms of how they help their customers with sustainability,
Uh-huh.
but also there will be different suppliers. Maybe you mentioned Malaysia. Maybe they will need to consolidate some of them so they can report together. They can get to a level of common understanding of what the requirements are from their customers.
Got it.
So it sounds very interesting in total. You also mentioned maybe changing a little bit the regenerative business models, and
Right. So this, how I use this, the term regenerative, which I'm really trying to sort of unpack a bit more in some of my subsequent research, and maybe I'll be writing another book that focuses on this, is really thinking about how companies can transition from an idea of sustainability as do less harm to an idea of actually trying to have a positive, net positive impact on the world. And this is most used, the term regenerative in agriculture, where if you actually design an agricultural system the right way, which I mean, it's not even designed. If you actually, if you actually, engage in agriculture the way people did 100+ years ago, and beyond, before this big industrial agriculture came in and dominated, you can actually, you increase, the soil, the sort of the quality of the soil, the biodiversity, et cetera. And so there's been a lot of work on regenerative agriculture. A lot of what I'm trying to do is think about business processes to help companies become much more, net positive in some ways. And this is more than just, I think, a set of, sort of governance or accountability mechanisms, but really a fundamental shift in mindset. As an example, one of the companies that I studied in Better Business is Patagonia. Uh, and so Patagonia, I sometimes hate to use because everyone uses Patagonia for sustainability and they're sort of a unicorn in that respect. However, I think in this case, it's really a great example because what my informants there had told me is that when they actually got into the Patagonia provisions business, which is food products, beer, they learned about regenerative agriculture, and they thought, like, why as a business can't we actually um, you know can't we actually have net positive impact? And so they went on a long process of trying to sort of understand even how they think about the business, and they changed their mission statement. Their mission statement used to have something like, do less harm in it, and they said, "This is crazy. We are about the environment, and here we're doing less harm." And so, they started actually actively, promoting less consumption. They started, secondhand marketplaces. They started repairing, garments. And so that's sort of a example.
And it's a great example actually. Regenerative agriculture, I think it's even in the Bible. I'm not an expert in that domain, but I think they cultivate for 6 years and let the
Yeah.
ground, the plantation to
Yeah.
regenerate for 1 year. So but to me also there is a contradiction about what we're asking the executives in terms, we talked already about the different time slots, right? So when you measure them on 3 months and 12 months performance, um, how can you entice them also to think about strategy, about long term? That those decisions may actually uh, be transferred
Sure.
over 2, 3 generations of CEOs,
Yes.
right? Especially they have a short lifetime now. So
Yeah. It is a challenge, and I think that it's something that I don't think it's hard to think about it being done voluntarily. Well, let me say two things. So one, I think so much of our thinking of companies is based on public companies. But
mhm.
actually, those are actually a small number of companies. There's like, tens of thousands of them. When there's millions of businesses, around the world, and many of them are family-owned businesses where they do have a much longer perspective. So I do think there are sort of a set of companies that these ideas, they're able to embed much longer term thinking. And I think also, this is where I think the state has to play a much larger role too, of creating the standards that require business to be much more sort of long term in its orientation so they can implement these ideas.
And to me, CSRD it's one step in that direction. However, it doesn't do enough to place strategy on an equal footing with production
Yeah,
and
sure.
tactics and daily activities. And to me, this is one of the challenges of factoring in sustainability. If I look at students in your class, actually in Cornell, all of them or most of them report actually the fact that they understand sustainability. They would like to implement it, especially there is a generational component, right? The Gen Zers and so
Sure.
on are much more attuned to this. But then the large companies do not have the mechanisms to put this in the strategy. So one way for me to look at it, we try to move it from a cost center to a profit center. If it's only reporting, it's a cost center. If it's only
Sure.
compliance, it's a cost center. If it's only contracting, it's also part of the cost center. How do you move it to a profit center? I think it's something that we can do collectively. So we help the CEOs of these companies to operate in a balanced strategy versus strategy being longer term, as you mentioned, for small and
Right.
medium companies that are privately owned. I would say also centrally controlled companies, even if they appear to be public, like in China, they
Hmm.
also can afford a longer term strategy. So, do you see the same kind of dynamics playing at the governance level?
Yeah, I mean, like sort of you mentioned CSRD, and there. I mean, I do think it's. Um, I'm sorry. Can you hear me still?
Yes, I do hear
Okay,
you
okay,
well.
okay, great. It sounded like it sort of cut out. Yeah, so I think it's very important at the governance level to also be considering these issues. So there is the CSDDD, the Corporate Sustainability Due Diligence Directive, which I think is not as, I agree with you on sort of some of the critique of the CSRD, but I think there also needs to be, much greater provisions on somewhat of a double materiality side around around governance, because you can't just be beholden to the fiduciary. The fiduciary duty needs to be expanded to actually include, broader sets of stakeholders and things like human rights and sustained climate and sustainability. So, anyways, I think it's very important to get on governance to also be paired with, and I think in many ways, accountability and governance go very much together. And in the first book I wrote, Better Business, that was in some ways part of the point. I did had like a 2 by 2 diagram with governance and accountability, as the two different axes. And that was very important because, you know, companies can be strong in governance, weak in accountability, strong in accountability, weak in governance, but really, sort of they can be very reinforcing as well.
Right, and there is again the factor of time. How long are you accountable? So if you look at
Right.
compensation of CEOs, for instance, in different legislatures, in the US, the compensation is very short term. It's a few quarters, and you get your stock options, right? If you look at
Right.
compensation in, I think in Germany, you have to correct me there, uh, it's a longer term part of compensation. It's also how the company performs over a number of years. Is not immediate compensation, which encourage different types of behavior from the executives. I don't know if you've seen the
Yep.
same in Europe, like those differences between American companies and
Yeah.
European companies.
Yeah. There's a huge difference. I mean, I'm sorry, you cut off for a second. Can you say that again, please?
Sure. I was comparing US-based companies where the compensation packages are short term, usually a couple of quarters, and CEOs are in teens, of course, on the compensation, which many times exceeds the salary, the direct uh, compensation. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah. Yeah, I
And
can hear
and
you. Yeah.
then Germany, I think, where the compensation is much longer term.
Yeah. Yeah, compensation obviously is critical to that, and I think that the U.S. compensation has been dramatically broken in many ways because of the use of stock options, and so if you look at like the ratio between uh, average pay of CEOs and workers, it's gone from like 30 to 1 in 1970s to 300 to 1 now. And so I think that this short-termism has tied very much the pay to short-term stock price through stock options, and it creates this negative reinforcement cycle. And
Exactly.
so, yeah, that's been a huge issue.
And if you project this over sustainability, which is long term, for instance, we say weather changes every moment we listen to the radio or read on the internet. But climate change, it's over a period of 20, 30 years. So we're talking with much longer time processes that, as I mentioned before,
Right.
may span over a number of CEOs
Totally.
of companies. But this brings to one other question on how the academic research you are conducting now, how is driving change? How and in general, how do you see the academia's role
Uh,
in policy reforms?
Yeah, I see it as very important, and and sort of under leveraged, I guess is the best way to put it. I think that for a long time there's been a huge focus um, on economics as the dominant sort of perspective on policy, and I think this has reinforced this sort of neoliberal focused on shareholder both ideology and set of systems. And I think that, we need a broader set of academics from, my training is sociology, so I'm partial to sociologists, but also, you know, philosophers, ethicists, political scientists to really understand and grapple with the fundamental human and societal and common good aspects of these issues. Because, and in some ways, that's, one of the impetuses behind the Profiteers book, because um, this, the idea that sort of we have been so trained to just focus on the economic number, it sort of limits our attention on some of the bigger issues. And so I think that, yeah, I mean, I've written some things about this that I've had trouble getting published, to be honest, of the need to move beyond sort of an economics orientation in our public, facing impact of academics.
We had some time ago a guest which introduced us to the term of transdisciplinary. So the way I understood the term, and of course she wrote a number of white papers. She's a Canadian. I think she's a computer scientist actually,
Sure,
and she mentioned that the world has to move from disciplinary, what you mentioned. If you're an economist, if I'm an engineer, you expect an engineering paper from me, not an economic paper.
sure,
To multidisciplinary, which we think, we put multiple disciplines around a common table, right? And we ask them to communicate. To transdisciplinary, which means to deeper understand not only the language, the dictionary, but also understand what these disciplines, which we learn so much, so deeply, right, look horizontally and how they and that brings me
sure,
really to the next question. As an
sure.
educator, with experience in different countries and different systems, what advice would you give to, and I'll split the question into new graduates and professional pivoting to sustainability now? So there are mid-career people who says, I want to
Sure.
change. So
Yeah, I mean, I
maybe two
think that
questions in one.
oh sure. I mean, my advice is generally similar. This is something, we start, and this is a good way to sort of, I guess, we're towards the end, be coming back to some of the issues we talked about at the beginning, in that, these are issues that are only going to get more important. Even if some governments are pulling back, there's no indication that our climate related problems are not going to get worse. Our inequality related problems are not going to get worse. And this is going to put tremendous pressure on governments, on the general public, on companies. And so, actually, developing expertise and knowledge and sensitivities on these issues is only going to be very, very helpful to people's career, develop their human capital. And so I think that I think that the more knowledge, training on sustainability issues that people can get, I think it's tremendously important for this very reason. I think a lot of times my students, I think the professionals that I teach get this more. I teach a lot of executive education because they're seeing these risks up close. The MBA students, which are younger or earlier career, sort of people with a shorter careers, uh, think in some ways they want sort of the magic bullet that is going to lead them to be able to connect sustainability and profitability. And I think there's lots of instances where companies that are doing things that are, doing the right things, they end up sort of benefiting financially. But I think that the bigger issue is future risks and being able to help companies deal with those future risks. So I think that it's tremendously important for individuals, and the reason why is because it's tremendously important for the world. And I think too that just as a human, the um, sort of satisfaction and joy you get out of your work, if you're able to actually help make the world better, that's a much better a much better way to live than making the world worse.
No, and this is a very, very good summary. It's actually an observation also from another guest, which Professor Marquis came like yourself to the show, to the talk, and his observation was he's conducting these annual retreats for executives, and his observation was that if he changes the time frame from short-term profitability, which is, as you said, fiduciary, and it's built into the system actually, to longer term, what do you leave as a legacy to your children,
Right.
grandchildren? Suddenly the room changes and everybody understands sustainability in a very internalized way.
Sure.
It's no longer okay, another chapter in one book or another course in executive education, as you mentioned. It becomes internal, and they understand the deep connection to profitability. If they care about their companies in the long term, they want it to be sustainable. If they want to be resilient, sustainability is baked into the resilience, which is sustainability over a period of time. Of course, if you want to maximize profits, my joke is fire all the development of the company, because
Right.
there are a cost of doing future business, not
Exactly.
current business.
Right.
So I'd really want to thank you before inviting you back. I would like to thank you for taking the time to visit with us today. I would like if you can tell us where people can find you in the universities,
Sure.
and where they can find your books. And for our audience, make sure to tune in every week to a new episode of AKFI Actionable ESG Talk series, where you'll as you can see today, gain new perspective on how to mitigate risks and create value by integrating ESG, digital transformation, and AI. Thank you very much. Until the next week. Goodbye from Manuel and Chris.
Great. Thank you, Manuel. Great to talk to you.
Thank you. It was a pleasure to have you.